The New Orleans Saints might be rebuilding, but that's not why they're struggling. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I'm your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, the Saints defense desperately needs a jolt. Chris Olave puts on a show in his player of the game performance. We'll also take a look at the turning point in a bit of a different way, but we're going to kick everything off today with what you'll be talking about tomorrow, which is all about the New Orleans Saints' poor performances opening games, which don't seem to have a lot to do with their rebuild, which makes them all the more concerning. We got all that coming up for you on today's episode. We appreciate you very much, as always, whether it's your first time or your next time, being here with us this time, making us your first listen, and being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks. You can download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL. That'll get you $50 in lineups when you play your first $5 lineup. The New Orleans Saints aren't performing poorly because they're rebuilding. They're performing poorly because they're performing poorly. And that is a very concerning thing for this New Orleans Saints team when it comes to trying to sell this very bought-in roster on its future vision. That's going to be a big part of the task for this New Orleans Saints organization here throughout the rest of the 2025 NFL season. You can come in here and talk about how much the Saints, have struggled in the first quarter, which they have, minus 52 point margin so far in the first quarter, worst in the NFL. And the last time that I checked it, which was while the afternoon games were still going on, but it was beyond the first quarter in the Washington Commanders game. The Washington Commanders were the second worst team at minus 31. So a 20-point difference between where the New Orleans Saints are and where the Washington Commanders were at the time, thanks to our friends over at True Media. We could sit here and talk about the Saints getting gashed in the run game for 222 rushing yards, but all of those things might be seen as just simply indicative of the team's rebuild, which there are certainly areas of the game and areas of the Saints' struggles that are worth writing up to that. Saints are trying to find their identity. They don't necessarily really know what or who they are over on offense. It's not a big surprise. We knew that that was something that was going to be working itself out all throughout the season. But the thing that concerns me the most is how much this team goes out on the football field and looks immediately outmatched against the team that it's taking on. You can look at the Seattle Seahawks game certainly as an identifier of that. They looked to hang around with the Buffalo Bills, but early on they were outclassed. You get into the game against the Giants. They were outclassed early, then rebounded late. I think you could say the same thing about the Giants here. They looked like a team that didn't belong on a football field with the New England Patriots early on in the game last week. Then you get into the Chicago Bears game, and the defense held up well, but the offense wasn't able to get going. The Saints at one point well through the first half averaged 0.2 yards per play. That was their average gain on this game or throughout this game up against the Chicago Bears. And now the Saints have fallen to 1-6 with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers about to come to town and 1-7 on the horizon with that opponent. Although quarterback Spencer Rattler has played some of his best career games up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So we'll wait and see what happens in week 8. But this week 7 game was supposed to be the game that gave the Saints a little bit of an extra jolt, a little bit of extra juice, going up against Dennis Allen, facing, Kellen Moore being the last head coach hired versus Ben Johnson being the first head coach hired in this offseason cycle. Spencer Rattler going up against Caleb Williams. Caleb Williams, by the way, was awful in this game, but unfortunately, Spencer Rattler, just as bad a performance. 3 interceptions, had a fumble as well on the first drive that turned into the first 3 points that were led up by the Saints. So even on that side of things, the Saints just not able to get things going. But a lot of those things could be chalked up to the rebuild. However, that feels a little disingenuous. The fact that the Saints haven't looked like they were ready going out on the football field on offense in a number of weeks and having the same issues. Kellen Moore coming to the podium multiple times already this season. Couldn't get it done on first and second down, slow start on offense. Couldn't get it done on first and second down, slow start in the first quarter. Couldn't get it done on first and second down, created some long third down situations. Couldn't get it done in the opening quarter. Same story again here up against the Chicago Bears. And the thing that's most concerning about that is that when you continuously see the same issue arise over and over and over again, and especially one as explicit as the slow starts that the Saints have had so far this season, as explicit as the kind of, I would say, underpreparedness. I'm not going to say unpreparedness, but the underpreparedness that we've seen from the Saints. I think if you go back to Seattle, that was unprepared, right? But underpreparedness that we've seen for this team, particularly on the offensive side with an offensive head coach, like those things point back to coaching. And so this is going to become a big time emphasis and a very emphasized coaching point for this New Orleans Saints team, because the Saints have to act quickly. Look, no one's expecting them to turn this season around and become a playoff team. That's out of the question. That was never the expectation for this team in the first place, but they were expected to be a more competitive team. And to be fair, at the end of the second quarter and the beginning of the third quarter, the team was more competitive. And then the defense fell apart in terms of its defensive front, surrendered a bunch of rushing yards, and the offense continuously turned the ball over and couldn't find a way to consistently move the ball, and again sputtered when they got into enemy territory. It's been the same things each and every week. And the reason why that's so concerning is because those are all coaching points. And ideally for the Saints, the coaching staff isn't the thing that's changing. It'll be the personnel. It'll be figuring out the quarterback situation over the course of the next few years. It'll be rebuilding your defense in the vision of Brandon Staley right now, still playing with mostly Dennis Allen's defensive personnel. It'll be rebuilding the offensive line, which still very much needs help and just took potentially another big hit with Eric McCoy, the fear there being a potential long-term injury as he's dealing with a pectoral injury. We'll get more information on that either later or maybe that information's already come by the time that you're seeing this or listening to this. However, the thing that's not expected to change is that Kellen Moore is supposed to be the head coach for the foreseeable future, right? He's supposed to be the guy that comes in, kind of rebuilds this organization and gets it going. But with so many coaching points being the flaw, being the issue, the slow starts, all these other things, that's not something that's going to change with the personnel changing unless you just get guys out there that are going to be able to go out there and make the plays for you. But this is not a roster that's completely devoid of talent. Look at the game that Chris Olave just had. We'll break that down here in a little bit, but one of our big challenges going into this week that we put forth on this show was that the playmakers needed to show up and show out, and Chris Olave showed up and showed out. So they have the talent on this roster. They still have Alvin Kamara. They've still got Rashid Shaheed. They've still got good players on defense as well. Quincy Riley getting his first interception of his career, the first of probably many. But the biggest thing for New Orleans that they've got to get figured out is how they make sure that the coaching points actually start to show progress. Because right now we've not seen that. Now there's time, right? This isn't you got to do it now or everybody's fired, or you got to do it now or it'll never happen. No, none of that's true. The Saints have time to get all this done. That is the benefit of the rebuild. But right now, the struggling performances that we're seeing from New Orleans is simply because the team is struggling and because the coaching has not yet been able to get that fixed. That's got nothing to do with the rebuild. And that's something that would be consistent moving forward if it doesn't get addressed and changed quickly. And the Saints would be wise to get that addressed and fixed, because the buy-in that this team has right now on its roster is priceless. And you can't waste that right now. We got more coming up for you here as we continue on, much more on the show. Chris Olave standing out big time. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by Rippling. If you're a small business owner, you know the truth. SaaS promise you an opportunity to make your work easier, but now the average company is completely bogged down by hundreds of apps that all slow down your teams and simply don't work together. That's not SaaS. That's sad. That's software as a disservice. That's why you need Rippling. Rippling is an all-in-one unified platform for global HR, payroll, IT, and finance, all in one place. None of those disconnected tools and all that good stuff. Instead, you get what you need for clarity, speed, and control. Rippling has everything from onboarding to payroll to IT access, running automatically and perfectly in sync. And right now you can get 6 months free when you go to rippling.com/lockedonnfl. That's rippling.com/lockedonnfl. That's rippling.com/lockedonnfl for 6 months free. Terms and conditions apply. This episode also brought to you by friends over at Prize Picks, the easiest and most fun way to play daily fantasy sports. You don't want to miss out on all the excitement of football, basketball on the way. Every day we make decisions, but over at Prize Picks, if you're right, you can actually get paid, which means it's good to be right. Here's how you do it. All you got to do is choose more or less on 2 to 6 players and their Prize Picks projections. So I'll give you a little bit of an example. Spencer Rattler, 225.5 passing yards. You think he's going to have more or less up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. You can also take a look at some of the bonuses and the max discounts that they have, like the October 21st game between the Los Angeles Lakers and the Golden State Warriors. Steph Curry only needs a half a point, more than half a point, and then bang, you got a win there. Get it right on a couple of other players, and you could be winning big. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups when you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL at Prize Picks for $50 in lineups over when you make your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. All right, family, no doubt. Did wide receiver Chris Olave have the best game of his career so far? We're going to get to our turning point here in a little while, which we're going to take a little bit of a different approach to, but I want to start us off here with player of the game, which of course goes to Chris Olave.
This is the Locked On Player of the Game.
Yes, we've got Chris Olave here with player of the game for this one. 7 targets, 5 catches, 98 receiving yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns. His first ever multi-touchdown game as a pro, believe it or not. One of the big things that we said on Friday's episode leading into this game up against the Bears is that while we didn't believe that the Saints were going to win the game, if they wanted a chance to win the game, it was going to be because some of the playmakers rose to the occasion, that they would show up and show out. And I think we saw Chris Olave both show up and show out, bringing in a big 58-yard reception as well, which is the longest of his career. As we mentioned, his first multi-touchdown game of his career as well, catching touchdowns of 21 and 14 yards. So just outside of the red zone, in the red zone, making some contested catches in the process as well, and also helping to move the ball down the field in other situations too. Chris Olave had a fantastic game. And this is a guy who, after the game, when we spoke to him in the locker room, talked about how he's always going to ride for Spencer Rattler because that's his quarterback, and talked about how, where he and the organization are with all of these trade rumors swirling around, that they're on the same page. Now, what exactly is the same page? We'll see. That will all come together in time. But Chris Olave did a lot for himself in this matchup. He did say that the Saints and him have been talking about an extension, or rather the Saints and his team, right? His representation have been talking about an extension since, as the year began. I assume that he means not necessarily the calendar year of January, but probably as the season got underway, training camp, all those other things. And that aligns with some recent reports that we've seen out of The Athletic, with Diana Russini saying that the Saints were hoping to get a long-term extension done with Chris Olave. And of course, these conversations always come up right around that trade deadline, which is just a couple of weeks away on November 4th. So what's true? Is it that Chris Olave and the Saints are looking for a trade, which is something that I've heard? Or is it something that, they're looking at the market because they're going through with this extension? Both of those things can be true and are all a part of the negotiation standpoint. So we'll see where things end up. But I think Chris Olave did himself a big time favor, showing the Saints that they should pay him, because if that's the guy that you're getting, you're going to pay for that. And also, if the Saints don't want to give him that, elevating his market outside of the facility by going out and having a really good game against a really good defense in the Chicago Bears. The revenge game with Dennis Allen getting the best of the New Orleans Saints by far in that matchup. And so Chris Olave, despite that, coming out as a top performer and our player of the game here, pretty big for him, because it opens up a whole wide swath of opportunities ahead of him, whether it be negotiating a new contract with New Orleans or eventually negotiating a contract elsewhere following a trade. We'll see where things go. But if that's the guy that Chris Olave if that's the guy that the Saints are going to get out of Chris Olave moving forward here throughout the rest of the season, that is absolutely something the New Orleans Saints should be looking to pay for and keep in the city of New Orleans. As we get through that, now let's go and take a look at our turning point of the game.
Time to reveal where the game was won or lost. It's the turning point.
Well, if the definition of turning point is when the game was won or lost, the game was lost at kickoff. The New Orleans Saints did not look like they were prepared for this matchup again. We've highlighted why that's a big concern for New Orleans, because that's not rebuild relevant. That's coaching. That's a whole bunch of other things that you want to see get better. There's time for that to get better. So what I'm looking at now is not necessarily a turning point of that game. Although I will say that the Saints did start to inch closer as they connected on the 21-yard touchdown of Chris Olave before halftime, the 14-yard touchdown coming out of halftime. And so the immediate turnovers that followed that, likely the turning point for this matchup. But what I'm more concerned about is what the turning point for this New Orleans Saints season will be and what it will look like. Again, there's no turning point that turns this team into a postseason team, right? They're 1-7 or 1-6, probably about to be 1-7 going up against Tampa Bay Buccaneers next week. They're sitting pretty as the number 3 overall selection in the NFL draft. That's not a bad situation to be in for a team that's looking to utilize its assets to make its team better, and a team that might be pursuing more assets before this season is over. But I think what I'm looking for is where's the turning point in which the confidence is back? You got through the first 2 games of the season up against the Arizona Cardinals and the San Francisco 49ers, and there was real confidence about how competitive the team was because the expectations were low, but they were exceeding those low expectations. Right now, the Saints feel a little bit below expectation, even though the expectations were already so low. Now, I'm not going to sit here and, trash the team or anything like that because I understand the process through which they are going. There are concerning things, however, that need to get fixed before it's too late. We were talking about as we wrapped up the last segment about how important it is for the Saints not to lose on the immense amount of buy-in that they have right now. I talked to players like Cam Jordan, Chris Olave, Isaiah Stallbird, and others after the game in the locker room, and all of them talked about how bought in they are, how locked in they are, how, a testament to the locker room, all those other things. The Saints have to be able to take advantage of that by making sure that their vision is something that feels attainable. Where you end up losing all of that buy-in is when that vision becomes unattainable and therefore generates frustration. And so for me, what I'm looking for is when will the turning point for the New Orleans Saints be? Going up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers next week at home, finding a way to be surprising in that game. Certainly a way that they could go. Obviously, a lot of conversations going to be going on around the quarterback position. We'll be talking about that in tomorrow's episode as well. Could the Saints get a jolt from a quarterback change? I'm sure that's something that will eventually be discussed before the season is out. But as of right now, I'm very curious to see when is it that the switch flips, not to turn the New Orleans Saints into a competitor all of a sudden, but to help the New Orleans Saints vision that the coaching staff has, that the organization has to make sure that that becomes clear and undeniable to these players who are bought in now and need to remain bought in with the rocky road ahead. Coming up next, the New Orleans Saints defense is badly in need of a jolt, and I have no idea where they're going to get it. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends over at Mazda. Mazda crafts cars for those who do more than simply move. Mazda delivers confidence with every one of their rides, with more IIHS Top Safety Pick Plus awards than anyone else as of August 2025. From footwork to breathwork, you know that athletes sweat every single detail, and Mazda brings that same level of intention to how they craft every model as well. You can find all that fantastic craftsmanship in every detail, everything from metallic accents to that available Napa leather upholstery as well. All the things that make your everyday drive into anything but, including smooth handling and intuitive controls. And beyond all that, don't forget you also get that all-wheel drive comes standard in crossover SUVs so that you could drive with confidence in almost any season. Just like all your favorite players, Mazda sweats every detail because when you make every move count, impossible becomes irrelevant. Mazda move and be moved. Today's episode also brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. NFL season continues to roll along, and FanDuel is making sure that you do not miss out with every single kickoff, especially new customers. Right now, new customers can place your first $5 bet, and if that bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets. That's right, pick a bet, put down $5. If that bet wins, you get $300 in bonus bets that you can use all across the app on other odds, lines, and props. You can also dive into same game parlays and, of course, live betting as well, which is one of my favorite features over at FanDuel. Next week, the New Orleans Saints have already opened up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as 6.5-point underdogs. So maybe you like the Saints to come up with the upset of the century in this one. Maybe you like the Bucs to cover. You can get in on all of it over at FanDuel today. So what you waiting for? Head over to FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app and get started today. That's FanDuel.com. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. The New Orleans Saints defense is desperately in need of a jolt, and I'm not sure where they get it from here in the 2025 NFL season. The Saints defense actually started off pretty strong here in this game. They went from allowing 14 points in each of the first two possessions of the last four games going into this matchup to allowing just 6 points in the first quarter. Pretty good situation for them during the opening portion of the game. But of course, during that time, the Saints offense was struggling. Then when the Saints offense got going, then all of a sudden the defense kind of, started to fall off a bit. And then as the defense fell off, Spencer Rattler got more, interceptions and fumbles and all these other things. And it just put everybody in a bad situation. But the Saints defense still feels very much like it needs a jolt. I don't know what it is about the New Orleans Saints, but for some reason, anytime that they miss a sack, it doesn't turn into a quarterback throwing the football away or a quarterback scrambling for a couple of yards or something like that. It almost always turns into some huge gain for the opposing team. I feel like I watch other teams play and other defenses play, and they miss a sack, and then the pass is still incomplete, or it gets thrown away, or it gets checked down for a couple of yards or something like that. But for whatever reason, there's something about what the Saints are doing on the back end that means that whenever the front does not get home or gets close to getting home, but then breaks contained because they didn't get home or whatever it might be, that all of a sudden it just turns into some big old gain somehow or another. So for the New Orleans Saints, this is something that absolutely has to get fixed for this team. They've got to start making plays at the quarterback. They had several opportunities against Caleb Williams, and I get it. Caleb Williams is a, athletic, evasive quarterback, but there were times where he was absolutely DTR and they could not get him down. And then there was the one point when they finally did, when Chase Young gets his first sack of the season along with Brian Brzee. But the Saints defense needs that player that can take over a football game, and it does not feel like they have that player on the roster right now. I thought that the coverage was mostly good. Caleb Williams didn't have a lot available to him in the passing game. There were some things, though, to where this defense just gives so much space to receivers, and so I don't know if that is a combination of maybe a player's not where they're supposed to be, or if Brandon Staley's system is just truly giving that much space without the opportunity for a player to be able to climb down and be able to make a play. Maybe it gets better going into year two as players are more kind of, experienced and accustomed to having to move into zones and move out of zones and all these other bits. But coming out of this game, Quincy Riley gets his first interception of his career. And even that wasn't enough to kind of get the defense rolling, right? We saw against the New York Giants, they got their first takeaway on that fumble that was recovered by Jonas Sanker. If I recall correctly, it was forced by Demario Davis. And then maybe there was an opportunity there for the team to just get more and more chances. I mean, we saw against the Giants that they got the one turnover and then they just came in droves after that. But that didn't happen here in this game up against the Chicago Bears. And so something is needed desperately on this defense. And I don't think there's anything on this roster that's going to provide it. I don't think there's anything right now here in 2025 that's going to provide it. And so it's probably an offseason thing. But this Saints team really, really needs that player that can just go and take over a football game. Now, I'm saying that as if that's simple. There are only so many of those players. And by the way, those players don't do that every single game. They have the capacity to do it, and they do it in some games. You think about Myles Garrett, TJ Watt, some of these other guys that have that ability. But even they don't do it 17 games out of 17. They do it 5 or 6 games out of 17, 2 or 3 games out of 17. But right now, the Saints feel like they're getting 0 of that out of 17 games. And so that's going to mean that going into the offseason, where the Saints spend their money defensively, how they flip that personnel, the roster, which we expected from the very beginning was going to be where the Saints were going to spend a lot of time focusing over the course of the offseason. They're going to have to get something figured out defensively to get this defense a little bit of a jolt, to get some more of the juice, to get some more of the energy. It just doesn't feel like the Saints have had that in several years now. And even, you might think, oh, well, Dennis Allen leaves and the defense falls off. No, the defense was falling off under Dennis Allen as a head coach as well. And so, look, it's only the first year under Brandon Staley's scheme, which is very different than what the Saints have done before. The Saints carried over most of their defensive personnel from last year into this year, aside from those that were added. I think we're going to start to see players replaced going into next year. You can already kind of see hints of it all throughout the defense. And so I'm really interested to see sort of where this defense gets its juice from. Where does the jolt come from? We talked about where does the turning point happen. I want to see where this turning point happens for this defense, where all of a sudden maybe Brandon Staley's scheme clicks, or Brandon Staley gets the right combination of players out on the field and it clicks. Whatever it comes from, however it happens, I'm very, very intrigued to see where it all goes for the New Orleans Saints. But with the personnel that they have right now, it just doesn't feel very likely that it's going to happen or all come together here during this 2025 NFL season. Last thing I wanted to discuss here, which will carry over to tomorrow's episode, is going to be the conversation that will continue around Spencer Rattler. Spencer Rattler responsible for 4 turnovers in this game. He had 3 interceptions, had a fumble as well, had moments where the game just didn't seem like it was fitting for him, but then had moments where he was brilliant. I mean, all 3 of those throws to Chris Olave, the big pass down the field, the 21-yard touchdown, the 14-yard touchdown, all really good, but trying to direct traffic and put one over on the top of Rashid Shaheed, overthrows, gets intercepted, puts one behind Mason Tipton, gets picked off. And so now the conversation around Spencer Rattler is going to be, is it time for the Saints to have a quarterback change? I don't expect the Saints to rush into a quarterback change, but at this point, as he is 1-12 throughout his career, 1-6 so far here over the course of this season, it feels like at some point the New Orleans Saints are absolutely going to pull the trigger to get a look at Tyler Shough, but that might not come until after the bye week. We'll dive in on more of that tomorrow. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. If you see me, please say hi. If you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing, how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.